Looking for a haircut? Look, Howard Stern Show. Richard Christie, as usual, listening and sending a list. We'll start with Richard's list. At 5, he's got Frank Bello of Anthrax. I agree. Frankie is a great player. In a lot of ways, I think an underrated player. And as Richard says, a hell of a nice guy in that as well. So Bello at 5, Lemmy at 4. Richard writes, no explanation needed. Lemmy rules. At number 3, Doug Pinnick of King's X. Good call there. He writes, best bass sound ever. At number 2, Steve DiGiorgio, Testament, Death, Charred Rolls of the Damned, which of course is Richard Band. He says, I'm biased, but Steve's performance on Death's Individual Thought Patterns album is godlike. And at number 1, Richard has Steve Harris, the most metal right hand in the world. Thank you, Richard, for listening and your list. Matt Larson writes, the bass player is the glue to a rock band and probably the most underrated role in any band. All of my players are pick players, which gives the music extra punch. Tommy Stinson at 5 from the Replacements, also played in Soul Asylum for a bit. And of course, Guns N' Roses. Lemmy at 4. Gene Simmons, 70s era at 3. Eric Avery at 2. And Duff McKagan at 1. Interesting list from Matt. My friend Chad Westmoreland. Let's see. He's got Chad likes to do this. Chad likes to make what he thinks is going to be my list and then send me his. Let me see how many on his predictions of my list he got right. 3. Because according to Chad, my list, without him knowing it, was going to be Geezer Butler, Steve Harris, Pete Way, Cliff Burton, Michael Anthony from top down. He got Geezer, Steve Harris, and Pete Way correct. I did not have Cliff Burton or Michael Anthony, as much as I love them both, on my list. So, Chad, you're batting about 3 out of 5 each week doing this. Decent odds. I don't know if I can play the lottery on it, but decent odds. All right, let's get to Chad's actual list. Number 5, David Ellefson, of course, of Megadeth. Number 4, Leon Wilkeson from Leonard Skinner. At number 3, Cliff Burton. At number 2, Geddy Lee. And at number 1, Steve Harris. So of Chad's list, out of his list, we actually share 2. The list he predicted I was going to have 2 of 3, or 3 of 5. Brian Meter at the Guitar Sanctuary. Number 5, Steve Harris. Not much needs to be said or redefine the role of bass player in a hard rock metal format. Much like Geezer Butler before him, it's rare to have the bass player have such an influence on the overall voice direction and footprint of a band. That being said, Brian doesn't have Geezer Butler on his list. I did, and he came before Steve. Number 4, Geddy Lee, true innovator. Number 3, Jack Bruce, guy who inspired a lot of 70s and 80s bass players that came after him. That's certainly true. Number 2, Billy Sheehan. Brian's point about Billy Sheehan is, yeah, all the flashy stuff, but the more simple melodic stuff, he doesn't get enough credit for. And number 1, John Entwistle. To me, there would be no Billy Sheehan or Jack Bruce or Geddy Lee without the influence of Entwistle. So there you go. That's good to see. And I'm assuming we'll probably see a lot more of Entwistle as we go. Given that we had people call this show and upset that there wasn't more John Entwistle love in the respective categories with The Who, meaning Daltrey or Townsend. But if there's ever going to be now we might get that with the rhythm section. Because if we see a lot of Entwistle coming up, and then, of course, next week we're going to do drums, so we could see a lot of Keith Moon, maybe The Who makes a late surge in the rhythm section department. Steve Bennett, Sportscasters Podcast. Michael Anthony at 5. Good to see Michael making a nice showing here. Very underrated bass player. Makes it on his voice and the backing vocals. Billy Sheehan at 4. Duff McKagan at 3. Jeff Ament of Pearl Jam at 2. Most underrated member of the band, Steve writes. Steve is also a massive Pearl Jam fan. And at number 1, Geddy Lee. By the way, I thought what Eddie Vedder did, if you guys saw that concert over the weekend, that Global Citizens deal, I thought what Eddie Vedder did was the best thing of the whole broadcast. The most heartfelt, the most meaningful, the most real. Half of that stuff people were lip syncing. Somebody made the point that Lady Gaga did this whole bit and she was singing into like a $20,000 microphone that you could see wasn't even turned on or was turned backwards. J-Lo was apparently so blatantly lip syncing. I couldn't watch it. I couldn't. Just not even going to go down that road. But anyway, I thought what Eddie Vedder did was awesome. So there you go. Thank you, Steve. Just getting warmed up here. My friend Izzy Presley in the house. Doug Pinnick at 5. Now we got 2 Doug Pinnicks early on. John Paul Jones at 4. Cliff Burton at 3. Duck Dunn at 2. And at number 1, we all know is a big Kiss fan. Gene Simmons. Wow. Thank you, Izzy. Let's see what else we got here, because I know there are a slew of these that we need to get to, and I want to get to as many of them as we can and try to move as quickly as we can. As I load up more emails here, give me 1 second. Here we go. Just clicking at random like I usually do, folks. Kind of luck of the draw if you make it in. Thank you for all who sent in emails. This is Tim, and he's in Red Hill, PA. He's got John Entwistle at 5, Jaco Pastorius at 4, John Paul Jones at 3, Steve Harris at 2, Geddy Lee at 1. I am assuming, knowing my audience, this is going to be a battle of Geddy Lee versus Steve Harris all the way. He writes, Eddie, you are the main reason I have XM Radio. Keep up the great job. Thank you so much, Tim. Appreciate you listening and the kind words. And for sending a list.